G'day mate, 40 here. So remember last week Donald Trump was at a rally and there was some health emergencies where medics were called because people had fainted. It was hot and stifling in the auditorium where Donald Trump was, and so he was on stage talking with Governor Kristi Noem, and he was taking questions from the audience, and Donald Trump just decided to stop the Q&A session, and for 40 minutes he just grooved and swayed and danced by himself on stage. I would never have the balls to dance on stage for 40 minutes knowing that there were network cameras there, not just hundreds and hundreds of people, but that this would be shown across the world. It would be widely dissected in the elite media, and Democrats seized on this as evidence that Donald Trump was crazy. Can you believe the guy? Can you believe the self-confidence and lack of inhibition that Donald Trump had to just groove and sway and dance by himself at age 78 on stage for about 40 minutes? That's an incredible level of inhibition. And it fits into what we know of Donald Trump's personality. The outstanding trait that distinguishes Donald Trump from the rest of politicians is his lack of inhibition. Overall, I've interviewed a lot of politicians. I interviewed Senator Alan Cranston. I interviewed U.S. Republican senatorial candidate Ed Schau. I think I did. I've interviewed a lot of politicians. Mike Antonovich. And the outstanding characteristic of politicians is inhibition. And it's quite different from, say, the outstanding characteristic of people in the pornography industry, which is disinhibition. And Donald Trump is less inhibited than any other politician of which I'm aware, which makes him so electric and so volatile and so compelling. It's incredible. And so there's nothing crazy about dancing by yourself for 40 minutes on a stage at a campaign rally. It's unusual. It takes huge balls. It's bizarre, but it's not crazy. And the Democrats would seize on this as evidence that Donald Trump is crazy shows that they don't have much else to run on. Have you had the experience of being in a situation where other people have just exhibited much more courage and self-confidence than you did, and you just watched it and you're envious? I mean, could you imagine just dancing and swaying alone on a political campaign stage for 40 minutes, knowing that there are all these cameras and journalists there to analyze what was going on? And so this is Donald Trump's great strength and also his great weakness. And what made his term successful, to the extent that it was successful, is that he had inhibiting forces around him that discouraged his worst instincts. For example, Donald Trump wanted to hit various drug labs in Mexico with missiles. That would not have been a good idea for America's best interests and best relationships with Mexico, but he had enough people on his team said, that's a really bad idea, sir. We can't do that. And Trump had a lot of other crazy suggestions that have been well documented in books about the Trump administration. And so you need people with inhibition to step in when Donald Trump starts making crazy suggestions. And we have reason to expect that Donald Trump will get these kind of inhibitions in his second term. But Ezra Klein has a long essay in the New York Times under the headline, "What's Wrong with Donald Trump?" And it begins with that story of Trump just swaying on stage to the music for 40 minutes during a campaign rally, canceling the question and answer session. How Democrats seized on that as evidence that Trump was crazy. Ezra Klein says that while watching that video of Trump swaying on stage, it helped crystallize, it distilled Ezra Klein's thinking about Donald Trump's personality. It's not that he's crazy, it's that he has a remarkably low level of inhibition for a politician. And Trump is having a great time right now. It's similar to the closing weeks of the 2016 campaign. So from his appearance at McDonald's to his jokes about Arnold Palmer's manhood, it's the Trump campaign that's giving off the vibes of joy. And just as there's one outstanding trait to Kamala Harris's personality, and that is her insecurity, which produces these stilted public performances, her frozen deer in the headlights look when she's not prepared for a question, why she's so cautious about making decisions. She's a terrible, terrible decision maker. This was known long before she became the Democratic candidate for US president. She's terrible at making decisions. She's a terrible manager of people. She's unable to keep staff. Her staff don't last long. And apparently she screamed at her political director who told her not to attend the Al Smith dinner because it would be seen negatively by the LGBTQ community, because the Al Smith dinner is hosted by the Roman Catholic Church in New York City. So her political director said, don't show up there. And I believe the last major presidential candidate who didn't show up to the Al Smith dinner was Walter Mondale. So we know how well that went for Walter Mondale. It was a terrible political decision for Kamala Harris, and apparently she screamed at her political director for 30 minutes, and Kamala tends to abuse the hell out of her staff because she's too insecure to make decisive decisions. She is too insecure to accept responsibility for her own terrible choices. And her insecurity causes her to look at other people with great suspicion. So we tend to see the outside world as we are, and if you're insecure and always fearing the worst about yourself, then you're going to tend to fear the worst about the people around you. Those who are at ease with themselves are more likely to be at ease with the imperfections of the people around them. So that's the magic key for unlocking Kamala Harris, is her deep insecurity. And perhaps Ezra Klein is right, that the magic key for unlocking Donald Trump's unusual personality, unlike that of any other politician of which I'm aware, is his lack of inhibition. Normally, politicians are incredibly stilted, careful, calculating, and inhibited, trying to stay on message, and they just don't seem authentic as human beings. A tree passed a moment ago may have been cosmopolitan, but it certainly wasn't rootless. Fascinating portrayal of Al Smith in Robert Caro's acclaimed book, The Power Broker. What I would love to see is a book-length critique of The Power Broker, because for all of Robert Moses's faults, it's hard to say that he left New York City in a worse position than if he'd never taken public office. Right, New York City is a more successful city than many other major American cities. So The Power Broker is a compelling read, but we need a book length, or I would love to read a long essay pointing out the shortcomings of The Power Broker. Watching Mark Halperin's show this morning, and bang, he just starts off the show right away with, if this early voting data retains this pro-Republican direction, particularly in states such as North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, Donald Trump will have won this election by election day. We will know by election day that Donald Trump is winning this election. And so when you get an insight, when you get some data, when you get an anecdote, you have to fit it into the wider narrative. And the wider narrative about the election result is that Republicans over the past 2 months have been increasingly confident of a Donald Trump victory, and no major Democrat has expressed to Mark Halperin anyway that he is confident that Kamala Harris will win. And then you have to fit that in to the behavior of the two campaigns. And you see with Kamala Harris, she's just throwing everything against the wall, trying out different messages. She's got ads promoting different messages. Right? There's no one coherent theme to her political campaign. She is campaigning as though she knows she is behind. And so she just keeps trying things. And I can't imagine how desperate you'd have to be as a Democrat to do repeated campaign rallies with Liz Cheney, right? Dick Cheney's daughter, conservative Republican, and how much Liz Cheney is selling out her conservative and pro-life credentials to campaign with Kamala Harris and to backtrack on her long time pro-life credentials to better fit in with Kamala Harris. Because when you want to get along with someone, right, you start finding all sorts of excuses to bend and to compromise and to walk back your previous stances. That social pressure is powerful. If you surround yourself with the Republicans, you'll be much more likely to see the world in a conservative way. If you're campaigning with Kamala Harris and her team, you're going to be much more likely to find all sorts of reasons to accommodate yourself to their point of view. And now Liz Cheney, who is always staunchly anti-abortion and pro-life, is finding all these new reasons why there's nothing wrong with compromising, and there's nothing wrong with the pro-abortion Kamala Harris point of view. And I mean, how incredibly flexible do you have to be with your politics to throw it all away now to just get along with Kamala Harris? And why on earth would Kamala Harris think that Liz Cheney is a particularly effective spokesperson for her cause? It strikes me as bizarre. Mark Halperin's right that opposition to the forever wars gets very little news media attention, but it is a powerful force in politics that Donald Trump has picked up on, along with his opposition to unchecked immigration and his opposition to unfair trade deals, now his opposition to forever wars. These are three widely popular positions that few other politicians have stepped up on and spoken out on and been willing to take a bullet on. And so Trump, in part due to his lack of inhibition, is able to tackle these points of view that are unpopular in the elite media. And so there are many advantages to the careful critical discourse of elites, but it does produce a stilted discourse, and it does blind you to the ugly reality of what's going on, because you're so devoted to rhetoric that is inclusive and considerate and compassionate and thoughtful that you refuse to admit all sorts of ugly realities. And much of reality is ugly, much of truth is ugly. It makes you uncomfortable. And Donald Trump, because of his lack of inhibition, is willing to pick up on, notice, draw attention to, describe those ugly, uncomfortable parts of reality that other politicians shy away from. And when Trump says, why should we take people from shithole countries, there are millions of Americans that resonate with that, but few other politicians would be as uninhibited as Donald Trump in speaking to that. And so if you view the outstanding distinguishing characteristic of Donald Trump's personality is, as Ezra Klein put it, his lack of inhibition, I think it's a useful key to both analyzing and predicting Donald Trump's behavior. That Donald Trump absolutely needs inhibitions around him because he doesn't have enough of them himself. On the other hand, if you're too inhibited, having uninhibited people around you is not going to counterbalance that when you're president of the United States. So on Mark Halperin's morning show, the Republicans were absolutely giddy with the early vote numbers. And this story got some attention in the Wall Street Journal today. But why is it that Mark Halperin has been way ahead of the rest of the news media in noting growing Republican confidence of a Trump victory? This is a theme Halperin has been hammering on for almost 2 months, and you almost never see this theme in the rest of the mainstream media. So is Mark Halperin picking out the $100 bill on the ground by noticing this important story that otherwise doesn't get much attention? And one explanation is that mainstream news as a business relies upon documents released by bureaucracies. And so that business model isn't suited for what Mark Halperin is doing, where he relies upon things told to him, not for attribution. Now, there are documents that are backing up Mark Halperin's point of view, right? It's the early vote data combined with private polling. So Halperin is getting access both to publicly available early voting data and also to proprietary private polling results. And so his wide number of sources is what enables him to break so many stories. Just as when I was writing on the pornography industry for a decade, it was my wide number of sources that enabled me to break so many stories. And one story that I broke about the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, not wearing his wedding ring for the past 9 months, that was equally available to other reporters covering the mayor of Los Angeles, but they found the story too distasteful. It was the first Latino mayor of Los Angeles in about 100 years, and they didn't want to report on something so tabloid, so salacious. It was an ugly part of life that their careful critical discourse predisposed them to avoid. And it was only when I published it on my blog, and my blog post got traction, that they went to the mayor to get him to address it. He denied it, he lied, and then more and more evidence came in. And eventually he admitted that he was lying and he'd been carrying on an affair with a TV newsreader on Telemundo. And Antonio Villaraigosa's political career never recovered from my blog post. And I got that blog post from talking to Tony Castro, who was interviewing me for a daily news story. He just relayed that anecdote about no sign of the mayor wearing his wedding ring for the previous 9 months. And then I bounced off a bunch of political reporters privately in email, and within 40 minutes of getting that information, in the course of being interviewed by Tony, I had the story up, phrased awkwardly on my blog, saying that Mayor Villaraigosa's marriage was kaput. So when you don't employ that careful critical discourse, when you just speak in a visceral way, it's not always going to be that smooth and that impressive. But much of life is not smooth, much of life is ugly. And a more inhibited approach to how you speak will blind you to honestly confronting the ugly side of life. And speaking of the ugly side of life, I pay very little attention to this Diddy. Is it P. Diddy, the rapper, is facing all sorts of accusations. And I paid little attention to the story, but I just started reading about it yesterday. And apparently his behavior was enabled by dozens of other people. And it just made me think about how much our understanding of reality is socially constructed. So when you live and work and depend for your income on a certain world, such as the world of this rapper P. Diddy and the human trafficking and the rape that went on, it's very hard to convince someone of something if their source of their income depends upon not understanding that thing. Famous quote from George Orwell. So in fall of 1995, when I decided to write a book on the history of the pornography industry, I read every other book that had been published on the topic that I could get my hands on, and the major articles in magazines such as Rolling Stone. And one of the books that I read was an autobiography by male porn star Jerry Butler. And he shares anecdotes in the book about how Ron Jeremy would push himself on women. And he even has a graphic description of Ron Jeremy pushing a female porn star offset, so in private, into an unwanted sexual encounter. So Jerry Butler describes himself as having sex with this particular beautiful porn star from behind in private. And then Ron Jeremy walks into the room and, against her protests, forces her to fillet him to completion. And so you read that, and a normal person would go, wow, that's rape. And there were many stories of Ron Jeremy forcing himself on women, but when I was reporting in the porn industry, this just seemed normal, right? It was just, if you're in the porn industry and you're hanging out with Ron Jeremy, and Ron Jeremy is importuning you to do various things that you really don't want to do, but that's just Uncle Ron. And in the socially constructed reality of the industry, nobody came out and said that Ron's a rapist. Until circa 2007, Ginger Lynn came out, the ex-porn star, and said, Ron Jeremy raped me. And then after that, there was a stream of women talking about how they'd been raped by Ron Jeremy. And I was embarrassed because I was around that atmosphere, and I was familiar with these anecdotes, but nobody phrased it in terms of rape when I was in the porn industry. And so I didn't think of it as rape, even though the evidence was there in black and white in the Jerry Butler autobiography. Before I ever talked to anyone in the porn industry, when I just first read his autobiography published around 1994 by Prometheus Books, Ron Jeremy is a rapist. But in the porn industry, it was rarely phrased as rape. It was just, oh, that's just Ron. And these are sex workers, and there wasn't a lot of sensitivity to sex workers getting raped, because none of the women who'd been raped by Ron Jeremy would speak out and say it was rape. Because Ron Jeremy was famous, he was influential in the industry, people were afraid of their careers getting hurt. But then once one person spoke out, Ginger Lynn, then there were a flood of people who spoke out, and then there were law enforcement investigations, and then Ron Jeremy was arrested. Now apparently Ron Jeremy has dementia, is unfit to stand trial, so it's unlikely he'll ever be a free man. But I was around him, and I didn't write stories that Ron Jeremy is a rapist. So too, you get to the P. Diddy situation, and in the music industry, there's just a ton of predatory behavior. In Hollywood and the entertainment industry, there's just a ton of cruel, cool, predatory behavior. And when everyone around you is doing it, is complicit in it, it's very hard to stand out and say, oh, this is rape. Because your reality is so much socially constructed, and we tend to take cues from other people because there's good evolutionary bias for doing that. We lived for hundreds of thousands of millions of years within small tribes, and we take our cue from the small tribe and to make substantially different judgments than your tribe would expose you to grave peril. Right? A group strategy will consistently outcompete an individualist strategy. And so it's a good heuristic to take your cues from the people around you. If the 10 people around you see things a certain way, right, generally speaking, the odds are that they are more likely to be right than you who go against them. And if you live your entire life within this small tribe, going against your tribe is very likely to lead to exclusion, isolation, and an early and uncomfortable death. Life in Orthodox Judaism is much more reminiscent of the way that our ancestors lived within small tribes. Because when you live within Orthodox Judaism, right, you are closely tied to dozens of people, and you may very well stay strongly connected with them most of your life. Right? You'll go to school with them, you will spend time in synagogue with them, you will socialize with them, you will be unlikely to have much of a social life away from them. And so life in a tribe is probably more suited for how we evolved than life as a cosmopolitan in a big city where you're acquainted with thousands of people and you have to take considerable care with how strangers might view your words and your actions, that you could be exposed and humiliated on social media at any time. This is a brand new development in our evolutionary history, and so there's an evolutionary mismatch, which I think largely accounts for why people are so scared to death of public speaking. Because when you're living in a small tribe, the chances of offending your tribe when you get up to speak are significant, and then the damage that you could do to yourself may well be permanent. And the upside of publicly speaking before your tribe is not nearly commensurate with the possible downside. And so life in a tribe tends to be much more conformist than life in a highly individualized culture. We've evolved to take great care with the social cues that we're receiving from the people close to us. And in Orthodox Judaism, right, is quite similar to life in Japan, that the nail that stands out will be hammered down. And so you read or listen to these stories about P. Diddy and all the coerced sex and women and boys being given drugs that in their drink that knock them out, similar to what Bill Cosby did to many women. And then people find themselves bound and gagged, repeatedly raped, forced to take drugs, humiliated, had the exploits filmed. And if you are filmed doing something humiliating, right, you're going to be particularly reluctant to speak out against that. And so how do you commit a Holocaust? All right, with the help of thousands of people. Right, one man can't kill millions. You need the active assistance of thousands of people and the passive acquiescence of millions to commit a Holocaust. And so too with the sex trafficking, sex coercion, the widespread rape committed by P. Diddy. Right? He had a whole team of people who assisted him. And imagine you're in that world, you're making a living from that world. And you would start trying to find ways to justify what's going on. You're likely doing drugs yourself, or you're probably engaged in some of the sexual excess yourself. And so you realize that you weren't clean. Your living, your social standing, your community, your friends, your career depended upon going along with the desires of this monster. So too with Harvey Weinstein. Right? People for years knew that he was predatory and a monster, and yet he remained among the top 5 most successful movie producers in Hollywood because no one had the balls to stand up to him and tell the honest, visceral, ugly stories about his behavior for fear of backlash. And so there was a socially constructed reality around Harvey Weinstein, around Matt Lauer, the anchor of the Today Show, around Ron Jeremy, around P. Diddy, where other people joined in and cooperated and assisted, and then the behavior is just reinforced. So as a convert to Orthodox Judaism, if when I went to an Orthodox shul, I wasn't counted in the minyan, I wasn't spoken to, I wasn't accepted, or didn't receive invites to Shabbat meals, holiday meals, right? Then it would be verging on the impossible to maintain my identity as an Orthodox Jew. So we all depend upon the people around us to reinforce our worldview. That's why you get the famous saying, show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you who you are. And I'm walking on the campus of UCLA, and Israel is engaged in a 7-front war in the Middle East right now. But because Israel has been so successful, because Kamala Harris's position as the Democratic candidate for president is so perilous, right? There are no anti-Israel protests, signs, demonstrations, shanty towns. It's quiet. People are just getting on with it. Also, it's the beginning of the school year, so people are taking things much more seriously than in spring, where people have been in school for 6 months and they become much more restless. And also at the beginning of the school year, it's easier to maintain your illusions that you're headed for great things. Well, after 6 months of schooling, if you got there by affirmative action, right, it's much more likely that your flaws and your weaknesses will be exposed. And it'll be a lot more difficult to maintain your illusions 6, 7, 8 months into a school year as opposed to 1 month into the school year. So we're currently 6 weeks into the fall quarter at UCLA. And there's far more security on campus now than there was before the outbreak of these anti-Israel protests last spring. So the presence of security incentivizes people to behave better, right? You're going to drive more carefully when you have police, when you have a police car right next door. Okay, looking at the chat, Elliot says women live in 10-minute blocks. That Kamala Harris ad with the guy with the white beard who's against billionaires. He's so anti-Trump, even though he looks like he'd be at a Bikers for Trump rally. What about Kamala Harris's apparent frequent inebriated state? Why does that seem to have been dropped even by a Trump campaign? Good question. I want to know more about it. Does she just appear drunk? Because I've often appeared drunk to people, even though I don't drink. We're all Trump supporters and voters. We want to be part of the Trump family. We want to see the Trump family in the White House for another 48 years. America will be rock, rock, rock. Solid, says the chat. So many people pay for far more attention to presidential races than to local ones. It is not true that it is the local races, in most cases, for most people, that are far more consequential. Very likely, Upton Sinclair, not Orwell, said, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon not understanding it." Yeah, all sorts of rape and assault are often tolerated in the hip-hop rap community. Yeah, it's an indictment of Diddy's entire genre and community that he's been able to get away with this behavior for so long. Welcome to Pokemon from Kentucky. In the who-whom narrative of oppressors and victims that has taken over our culture, reason and evidence counts for nothing. Harvey Weinstein's a rich old white guy. The women just say guilty, guilty. Well, Harvey Weinstein did behave in a terrible, terrible way. And he got away with it because he was powerful and because the incentives for individuals are not to speak out. Right, so the incentives for individuals are not to rock the boat. The incentive for individuals is not to risk everything for such paltry reward. So we have that ex-CIA officer who instigated the first Trump impeachment in 2019, and he is the subject of a long Washington Post profile, and he has great regret because he felt he put himself at peril, that what he did came at a cost to his own well-being. So he thought he was saving America, when in reality there was never any chance that a Republican-controlled Senate was going to convict and impeach Donald Trump. So he never realistically had a chance, but he became inebriated by his own visions of his importance of saving the Republic. It's the Washington, D.C. equivalent of Jerusalem syndrome. So many Jews go to Jerusalem and they become intoxicated by its history, its traditions. There's just something about being in Jerusalem that makes life incredibly vivid and important. You feel like your every act has divine transcendent meaning, and it's life-changing, and for some people they just lose their mind. So Jerusalem syndrome is where you become convinced that the Messiah is at hand, it's the end of time, that you have a messianic role to play in the ultimate redemption. And so too in Washington, D.C., people who devote their lives to foreign policy, to American politics, to government. It's very easy to have a delusion about saving the Republic. And that's what Eric, the whistleblower, suffered. Right? He had a deluded sense of his own importance. Then reality kicked in, and the individual price that he paid for instigating the impeachment of Donald Trump greatly outweighed the benefits that he hoped to accrue. Also, he made strenuous efforts to maintain his anonymity, and then the news media actively cooperated with that, saying that he'd be at risk if they named him. But there are other parties put at risk by what he did, so why should he be exempt from the consequences of his behavior? It's the same thing for news media coverage of women who claim that they were raped. Right? That accusation can ruin a man's life. Why should the women not be held accountable for lodging such a serious accusation? They should have to stand behind their words publicly, just like any other crime victim accusing somebody of a serious assault. So Eric, the ex-CIA whistleblower, right, he sat it out, convinced of his own rectitude, convinced of saving the Republic. But then when the impeachment fizzled out, he began assessing things on the basis of his own self-interest. So I suspect that if he were married, that he would have calculated things in a different way. Right? If you're married with kids, you can't just do what you think is important. Right? You have to take the well-being of your family into consideration, of your friends, your community, because everyone's going to pay the price if there's an enormous backlash to what you're doing, such as instigating an impeachment proceeding against the President of the United States. And what that whistleblower did is a common human failing, to become drunk at the prospects of a brave, righteous stand and have delusions about the positive impact for yourself speaking out. And then the more time goes by, the more you will assess things in terms of your own well-being. And your own well-being should be an important factor all along. So all sorts of people take moral stands that feel righteous, intoxicatingly righteous at the moment, but that they can't sustain. And so before you step up and do something incredibly courageous and risky, one should ask, can I sustain this? Can I keep this going? Can I pay the price? Am I willing for my family and friends and community to pay a price for what I'm doing here? Am I going to consult them that what I'm about to do is going to have negative repercussions for their lives? Will I be able to stand up to the pressure over days, weeks, months, and years? And Eric did all this, the whistleblower, with the full cooperation of the news media and our elites and social media, who would delete any content if you simply mentioned this guy's name, which was an outrage. I mean, only a whistleblower against a hated Republican like Donald Trump would you find that the news media, as a unified entity, and all the social media companies joining together to ban any content that mentions the whistleblower's name. So even though he's assisted by this enormous amount of media, social media, news media collusion, he still felt naked and alone and afraid and frightened and anxious, and recognizing that his brave stand was not in his own best interests. And there are times where it is worth taking a stand and doing things that are against your own best interests. And when you're a whistleblower, right, it usually doesn't work out well for you. But there are times when the good that you will do should outweigh the inconvenience and devastation that you will suffer. But incentives operate individuals who say the emperor's naked, individuals who blow the whistle on bad behavior by powerful people. There are powerful incentives against doing that because they'll have to pay a powerful price when they're alone.
Like if I haven't.
Now, if you have friends, community, family that you can turn to for support, if you have a good therapist, good 12-step programs, right, it'll be a lot easier to stand up under that level of scrutiny. But even then, not everyone is cut out to be a whistleblower, and so that's why people like Diddy, Harvey Weinstein, Ron Jeremy get away with horrible behavior. Now, blowing the whistle on Donald Trump is strongly socially incentivized because you have almost all our institutions, almost all of our elites, overwhelmingly our news media and our social media are similarly aligned against Donald Trump. So we've had recent videos of top executives at Facebook admitting how they manipulate the algorithm to punish those who criticize Kamala Harris. So Facebook and most other social media companies, aside from the platform X, are doing what they can to shadow ban and reduce the reach of Kamala Harris critics. And so it's a lot easier to blow the whistle in those circumstances. So,
My fault.
shows a great test of your judgment and your assertiveness. How much do you get out of the way for other people when you're walking down this busy street? And how much do other people get out of your way? And so the more assertive and confident you are in the way you walk, the more likely it is that other people will make room for you. So it's a test of, in part, of what's stronger, your frame or their frame. It's like a relationship. So in all my unsuccessful relationships, I've tried to live in her frame. I tried to adopt her priorities, and that never works. When I adore my girlfriend more than she adores me, that never works. But when she adopts my frame, when she adores me more than I adore her, that seems to work for her and for me. So why is that? There are, I think, strong evolutionary reasons why women are looking for a man who's strong, confident, decisive, who will make decisions. Because women tend to be indecisive and to allow their emotions too much power over their decisions. And so a man with commitments, decisiveness, courage, confidence, willing to step up, make decisions, to guide, and to live for things higher than her approval will usually be quite alluring to women. So usually the nice guys that try to do everything they can to accommodate themselves to women, right? Women find them unappealing and weak. So do you think Diddy is the only one in his genre of rap that engages in this sex trafficking, coercion, rape, drugging people? I doubt it, right? Think about all the rappers who get shot. Right? I'm not aware of many classical musicians who get shot. So I'm sure there are a lot of other rappers who are engaged in similar levels of heinous behavior with the active assistance of other people in the genre. So what's going on with Diddy? It's going on throughout his genre, throughout his industry. And you can often get insights into people by listening to their music, to their lyrics, to the things that they're saying. Bill Cosby was making jokes for a long time about drugging women. It was really a strange thing to do. So UCLA students are very law-abiding. Right? There's just half a dozen of them waiting, not crossing the street there because the walk sign was red, even though there was no traffic coming. Yeah, am I going to stop my walk and dance for 40 minutes? Hell no. How well substantiated the allegations against Diddy seem to be very strong. Yeah, I wonder what Nipsey Hussle would say about this. We will not see his like again. It's a good boy, just getting his life together. But how many gunshot victims are aspiring rappers? Seems like there's no more deadly life path than aspiring rapper. But how much of our life is socially constructed, right? It is substantially socially constructed. I'll give you a painful example from my life. I went around for years wearing a yarmulke that had stitched on it the letters FIDF. Right? It stands for Friends of the IDF. And that is objectively a weird thing to wear in a country outside of Israel. Right? Showing that you are a friend of a foreign nation's military, even when it's an ally, it's just feels a little off. But it wasn't until I was mixing with some strong American nationalists that I recognized, hey, this isn't a wise thing to wear. I don't want to be publicly advertising my friendship with the military of a foreign power. I'm an American citizen living in America, going to work in America. Cut it out. What was that extreme right, anti-communist society that flourished in America in the 1950s and 60s? I went to one of their meetings, and it was there that afternoon, going to that meeting, hanging out with William Johnson, I think of the American Freedom Party. And I went to this event wearing my FIDF yarmulke, and I don't believe I ever wore it again. It should be socially unacceptable to publicly advertise loyalty to higher loyalty to a nation other than your own. So if you're an American, it should be socially unacceptable to advertise that you consider the welfare of another country more important than your own country, to show more devotion to Israel or to Ireland or to Saudi Arabia or to China than to your own country, to cheer for Mexico when you live in America. That should be socially unacceptable. So I went to Seventh-day Adventist schools all the way through 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I went to this evangelical Christian school, Forest Lake Christian School. And that's where I first encountered this fringe right group, John Birch Society. Yeah. So I had a bad habit in my past work history and in my education. I would often spend time when I should have been doing my work or my schoolwork reading books and magazines. And at Forest Lake Christian School, they had these John Birch Society publications that were a good read. Right? They made a compelling case for conservatism. They weren't nearly the nutty. They didn't sound like nearly the nutty group that the news media portrays them as. They just seemed like traditional conservatives. Not a big fan of these scooters. They're quite disruptive and dangerous. And most people who ride scooters are not using headgear. So they're at a way too high a risk of doing themselves permanent injury. And then they just often leave the scooters lying around, so then people trip on them. So it's no wonder that many cities have banned them. And many personal injury attorneys have made bank on the proceeds from injuries from riding a scooter. So I remember about 3 years ago in San Francisco Bay Area, there was a great deal of reporting about how outraged many San Franciscans were against driverless cars. Well, in Los Angeles, we've had Waymo cars for I think about 2 years, and for approximately the first year, there was usually a person in the car, right? Someone in the car in the front seat as they were working out all the bugs. But for about a year now, Waymo cars have operated independently. And so many of my friends take a Waymo and there's no driver, right? This is just a fully automatic driverless car. And in my experience, they are far safer than cars driven by human beings. I'm sure there are downsides, there are risks, as there are with everything. But overall, I've never taken a Waymo, but just my observation of how they operate, Waymo cars seem far safer and more reliable than cars driven by people. I've had enough Uber drivers who weren't good drivers to make me more positive about Waymo cars. So apparently there's a waiting list to get access to the Waymo app, and they also do a background check But from talking to my friends who take Waymos and just from what I observed, they seem to be working out quite well in Los Angeles. So I wonder why Los Angeles gave Waymos a much more positive reception than San Francisco. And I think one answer is that there's much more passivity in Los Angeles compared to San Francisco. Right? San Franciscans are much more ornery, much more willing and eager to protest, much more given to outrage. They're much more political, much more socially conscious. They're much more likely to take individual and collective action, much more likely to give vent to their anger than people in Los Angeles who are more chill. So Los Angeles has about one of the lowest civic participation rates, one of the lowest political participation rates of any major American city. Large part that's because the majority of the population here doesn't speak English. GOP activist on X, apparently a US journalist, yet has a Zionist flag in his profile, not the US flag. Yeah, I think that's a really bad idea. Yeah, the Waco guy was a Seventh-day Adventist, so there are two strands of public Adventism that the public is most likely to know. One is the crazy David Koresh, Waco type side of Adventism. The other is the nurturing, pro-health side of Adventism. Yeah, there's a big activist culture emanating from UC Berkeley. So the police were here when I walked by 30-40 minutes ago. I don't recall hearing from anyone who's in Los Angeles who's outraged by driverless cars. And it's not much discussion of local politics. So it's not a dominant theme. What there is a widespread revulsion about is the district attorney, Gascon, who has been particularly soft on violent crime. And Gascon, thank God, he's unable to raise any money. He's trailing in the polls by about 40 percentage points. So even though a recall against him failed, now appears overwhelming that he will be displaced at the polls in 2 weeks. All right, 2 weeks from Election Day. Yeah, so what you put in your Twitter profile, such as putting a Zionist symbol when you're an American, you're sending a signal. And so by doing that, you're sending a signal that your in-group identity is more important to you than your wider identity. So when you employ costly signals, such as wearing a yarmulke, that's a public demonstration of loyalty to your in-group identity. So religious observance, religious affiliation, particularly with a high-intensity form of religion such as Orthodox Judaism or Seventh-day Adventism, comes with a significant price. And so when you send a signal that is costly, it's more impressive. It says more about who you are, and people take note of it more than when you send signals that are not costly. But thinking about those examples of Harvey Weinstein and P. Diddy and Ron Jeremy, I wonder how much that is messed up in my social circle that I just don't want to see, that I'm just blind to, that I don't want to be bothered about. Now it's good, a good part of being a public personality who discusses these issues out loud with other people is that I get challenged, I get different perspectives, and people have life experiences that I've never had. They will refute and rebut my arguments, and so it's much more difficult to live in a world of delusion when I'm talking about the issues and the values and the perspectives and descriptions of life that are most important to me. Right? If I'm touching on uncomfortable issues, right, people will be strongly incentivized to push back, point out where I'm wrong. I mean, as a man, that is a rush when I'm listening to someone who, say, I generally respect, but I realize they're wrong about something. Right? It's great fun. It's a rush to push back and to realize when they're wrong and I'm right about something, or when I make a prediction that turns out to be right. So men love competition, and so coming on here, doing a live stream, sharing my experiences and my beliefs and views and predictions, right, it's hard to maintain delusion when I'm doing that. So I have 4 different YouTube channels, and they average about 50,000 views a month, between 30,000 and 100,000 each channel. So on all of my channels, I probably get a dozen or so comments every day, and all feedback is a gift, all accurate feedback is a gift. And I do think much more clearly and effectively when I think out loud and think socially, and not just share my thoughts, say, within my Orthodox Jewish community. Good time for a walk because the homeless haven't really woken up yet. Still chilly outside. Well, I think it's about 70 degrees. The non-techies hate the techies in San Francisco. Putty bot once more, Elliot Blatt and Les Kipp. Yep, I've got 4 YouTube channels. There is Luke Ford Shorts, Luke Ford Live Streams, and then I think there's a channel that's just Luke Carey Ford. So I think in my channel description, I will have links to all my other channels. So this morning I woke up at 5:45, and I have 12-step calls at 6 a.m. So I didn't have any time to cut any shorts, but probably half of my mornings when I get up prior to 6 a.m. I have time to cut shorts. So I spent 30 minutes while eating my breakfast and listening to YouTube videos. I was just editing shorts that I had uploaded last night. So I had so much fun on last night's stream that I threw it into Clip Opus, got the AI to generate some clips, which I then edited, uploaded to my 2 YouTube Shorts channels, and then I go into the clips that I upload and I edit them further to cut out excessive breaks and pauses and to just tighten them up. And it's just something incredibly satisfying about doing that. Removing the long pauses, focusing the shorts on just the points I want to make, and removing that which is extraneous. And it's part of possession consciousness, right? When you're conscious of your possessions and your live streams, your video shorts, your podcasts, your descriptions, all right, it's an opportunity to develop your conscientiousness. So I would like a higher level of conscientiousness. So on a 1 to 10, I'd place my conscientiousness level at about a 7, which has been helped by my ADHD medication. So I notice people with ADHD, they don't tend to be terribly conscientious. They don't tend to pay attention to details. They tend to be quite careless. And that's certainly been true of me. But I noticed that when you're conscientious about your possessions, you're likely also to be conscientious about your podcasts and the things that you release into the world. Then you're likely to be conscientious with the type of people you allow to enter into your world. And you'll recognize more quickly when you have possessions that don't belong to you. So many people have this self-conception, I am not a theft, but they borrow things and they don't return them. They just assimilate other people's possessions into their life and they don't think of it as theft. But someone who is conscientious about their possessions and throws out or gives away or sells that which is not necessary, right? It begins a virtuous cycle. And so you may locate goods that don't belong to you that you can then return to people and make amends for having assimilated their belongings into your life. And it can encourage you to be more conscientious about the type of people you allow into your life. So I'm thinking about an ex-girlfriend of mine who felt sorry for a homeless woman and allowed this homeless woman to live with her for several weeks, and this homeless woman stole her identity, just caused all sorts of havoc. So I noticed people who are conscientious about their possessions also tend to be conscientious about the people they allow into their life. Right? One ill-advised person entering your life can just turn it upside down and do untold amount of havoc and damage, not just to you, but to everyone you care about. Another virtuous cycle is when you don't allow people to take more of your time than you have to spare. Right? When you develop the capability of stopping when other people are taking up your time that you need to spend elsewhere, right? It shows self-respect, it develops self-respect. And then you feel higher morale, you have more of a sense of self-efficacy, your ability to get things done, to follow your values and your goals. And that then builds throughout your life, and then people have more respect for you and treat you more carefully when they notice how you treat yourself, right? Other people generally treat us the same way that we treat ourselves. When you notice that you've assimilated a book or a possession that belongs to someone else, and then you return it and you tell the person what you've done, right? That accountability also creates a virtuous cycle. You feel cleaner and lighter. What the heck? Can't get through here. Bloody hell. They're trying to trap me. So one reason that I became convinced and desirous of converting to Judaism was that I realized I needed guidance for life, that I often lack common sense, or simply can't be bothered to pay much attention to the ordinary, because I live so much of my life thinking about the extraordinary. And so I thought, Judaism, that will provide me the guidance I need for the nuts and bolts of life. But I had so many disabling emotional addictions that I wasn't able to properly apply Judaism. And so there's great profundity at the end of the first step, right? So if it's Alcoholics Anonymous, first step says we admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So if your life is unmanageable, right, you very likely have some kind of addiction operating. Right, there's a lot of attention paid to we were powerless over drinking, gambling, sex, pornography, drugs, substances, and processes. But there's so much gold in the last half of that step that our lives have become unmanageable. So when my life starts to feel unmanageable, it's because usually there's an emotional addiction of mine that's operating out of control. On the other hand, there's this widespread mistaken rhetoric that when you live the 12-step life of recovery that you're just turning your life over to God. And you're not. Right? You are always running your life. God, higher power, the group may act as your GPS, but you're still behind the wheel of your life. And you have to run your life, and you'll have to make the decisions. Like, I run my life. Right? God, higher power, the wisdom, accumulated wisdom, the various 12-step groups that I belong to operate as a GPS in my life, but I still run my life. Right? I organize the habits that start my day, that end my day, that operate my day. So one of my disagreements with Kip and with many mystics is that a life that's enthralled with the divine and with God is usually not much earthly good. It's very easy to become intoxicated with God and become less interested in the people around you and what they need and what my responsibilities are, what my opportunities are. So in traditional Judaism, you're not allowed to study mysticism, or you are encouraged not to study Kabbalah until you're over 40. You're already living an observant Jewish life, and you're married with children. Because the individual who just goes off and does his own thing, whether it's becoming intoxicated with God or with politics or with exercise, is less likely to be operating in a pro-social direction than someone whose life is intimately connected with his family, friends, and community. And I notice with many under-owners in particular, they often want to spend hours in meditation and contemplation and extreme exercise, trolling online, writing books about themselves, political and religious activism, rather than addressing their responsibilities to pay their own way through life. When you don't pay your own way through life, you're much more likely to get into survival mode when your ethical standards become much more flexible, and when your situation is desperate, you're much more likely to steal and to rely on handouts and to behave in an unimpressive fashion. So that's why we have a responsibility to do everything that we can to stay out of desperation, to take reasonable steps to provide for ourselves. And one reasonable adult step is when you're working out and you start developing knee pain or arm pain or hip pain, you got to address it right away. Because if you don't address it, usually it'll just get worse and worse and worse. So usually one of the first places I go is YouTube, and I look for videos that explain why I'm developing knee pain, or right, I have a tendency to anterior pelvic tilt. My right pelvis tends to tilt forward because I'm right-handed, and so I have to do various exercises to minimize this tendency. And because the way that the eyes operate and the central nervous system operates wants to keep your eyes level, so when you get something like anterior pelvic tilt, your spine will start tilting. Your spine will go out of whack to keep your eyes level while balancing your anterior pelvic tilt, and your spine will get all twisted and distorted, and that can be disabling. So the last 7 years my back hasn't gone out in a substantial way, but occasionally I start to feel twinges in my back, and then I go, oh, I need to go back, pay more attention and put more effort and more time into doing certain exercises. And if you don't listen to the whispers that your body is giving you about things that are causing pain and distress, right, then you'll have to live with the screams that your body will deliver to you if you don't pay attention to the whispers. So one of the advantages and disadvantages of the Alexander technique is you become much more attuned to your body, you become much more sensitive to when you're using unnecessary tension and compression, and when you're not operating optimally, you'll be much more sensitive to it. While previously you may have just ignored it, but now if you're sensitive to it, you have the opportunity to take action, figure out what's going on, and to correct the problem before the whispers become screams. Last night's stream was a huge moral boost for us longtime Trumpians. Conspicuous absence of sukkahs. Yeah, this is not a strongly Orthodox community. Any comments on latest Kofnas drama? Yeah, Nathan Kofnas seems to be speaking the truth. I had notes to talk about what he was posting, but didn't get to it last night. So in my evening streams, I'm often dreaming of eating dinner and relaxing and enjoying the end of my day. Yeah, there are significant chances of serious harm coming to you at the hands of chiropractors. Talk to you blokes later. Bye-bye.